Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizenghausen, and today is August 17th. The main news at this moment. In Moscow and the regions, there are queues at gas stations again. Samara, Voronezh, Tula regions, and the Moscow suburbs, residents are standing in lines again. Today I came across a video from some Muscovite who was just freaking out, almost wrecked his own car, because not only did his goods burn down at the Wildberries warehouse, but he also couldn't find any gasoline. And this is Moscow. I mean, they warned that it would get worse. They really did warn us. By the way, you can't even imagine how one burned down Wildberries warehouse is knocking some sense into thousands of Russians who are suddenly actively calling for an end to the war. The war, which they hadn't really paid much attention to before. Another piece of news about gasoline. It turns out that the Indian gasoline imported into Russia ended up being twice as expensive as the Russian one and never even made it to the gas stations. They got ripped off here too. And the regions of the Urals and Siberia have once again been ordered to ship gasoline to Moscow. The Russian authorities have once again launched this wonderful mechanism of theirs, a campaign to prioritize gasoline supplies to Moscow. Well, why not? Their formula is, there is no life beyond the MCAD. The serfs out there in the wastelands will get by even without gasoline. The main thing is that Moscow and St. Petersburg have gasoline. The export of Russian grain abroad has turned out to be almost completely paralyzed. You see, one piece of news is better than the next. As they say, thanks to Putin for this. After drone strikes on the ports, grain exports have come to a complete standstill. Russian grain exports, which, let me remind you, brought more than 15 billion in foreign currency revenue into the Russian economy annually, have turned out to be almost completely paralyzed. This is after the strikes on the ports of the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea. Thousands of Russian farmers are preparing for bankruptcy, but the old man needs to continue the war. You see, everything is burning for him, but the war must go on. What was it he said there? You need to be bolder, you need to be even bolder. How much bolder can you get? Let him tell that to the farmers. He is going to ruin all of you there in Russia. I mean, seriously. And by the way, judging by the comments, some are already starting to realize this. There are those who understood this from the beginning, but now enlightenment is coming to another category as well. Russia is moving additional Iskander missile launchers closer to the border with Ukraine. You know, I read the news and thought, well, we're going to have some troubled nights. It turns out, do you know why they are moving them? Because the ones that were there have been thinned out quite a bit. These launchers, they're talking about 5 launchers, are being taken from the far eastern regions. That is, in the Bryansk and Kursk regions, the launchers have been significantly thinned out in recent days. The hunt for them is going on day and night. I really hope that the launchers being moved will also be sent to hell along with their crews. And in general, in recent days, the Russians have been caused serious problems in this direction. Moreover, a Bastion launcher was also recently hit in Crimea in the Balaklava area. I have talked about this. But information has appeared that another mobile launcher of the Bastion complex has gone to the concert along with its crew, this time near Voronezh. Wonderful news! By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It is important. We are fighting against Putin's propaganda, and it is much easier to do that together. So please subscribe. You can do it right now without delay. And now, a purely Russian piece of news. Well, this news just encapsulates all of modern Russia. It's just hilarious. So look, American rapper Kanye West is planning to come to Russia for 2 concerts at once. He plans to perform on October 10th and 11th at the Gazprom Arena in St. Petersburg. And this is where true Russian surrealism begins, because this very same Kanye West, who publicly wrote, "I love you Hitler, I love the Nazis," sold t-shirts with swastikas through his store, and in 2025 even released a song titled Heil Hitler. I mean, it's just, well, he called himself a Nazi, I love Hitler. After that, Australia revoked his visa. Great Britain banned him from entering altogether. But look at Russia's reaction. You would think they wouldn't let him within a cannon shot of Russia. The first deputy chair of the State Duma Committee on Culture, Elena Drapeko, is essentially saying, you know what? Well, maybe he's changed his mind already. I mean, she said that the arrival of the American rapper is actually a breakthrough of the blockade with the West. Now that is a breakthrough, for sure. I mean, a state that has literally built its entire ideology on the cult of the Second World War, the heroic deeds of their grandfathers. I mean, they are looking to the past right now. They have no future. They are looking to the past. While basing their entire ideology on the fight against Nazism, they are perfectly willing to fill a huge stadium for a character who, just recently, called himself a Nazi and publicly admired Hitler. What an amazing country, simply amazing. For the right money, I think even Hitler himself would have performed at the Gazprom arena. Although, why are we even surprised? They have an absolutely identical, modern, Botox-filled Hitler sitting in the dungeons of the Kremlin, unleashing wars. Another important piece of news, and an interesting one, I think it's very telling. The Kremlin fired its chief economist for the extremely inconvenient truth that this economist spoke publicly. The chief economist of Vneshe Ekonombank, Andrei Klepach, was fired simply by a call from above, because he stated that Russia risks losing the war of attrition and the economic competition with the West, and other statements of his also served as a pretext. He said that the costs to the Russian economy from sanctions are growing, the damage from Ukrainian strikes on chemical plants and the fuel and energy sector is increasing, and Russia is falling further and further behind technologically. And for this, that is, and let me remind you, he also has another very notable statement. The Kremlin's calculation, I quote, that the Ukrainian economy and state will simply collapse at some point, has not been justified and will not be justified. Well, and the old man in the Kremlin keeps repeating like a mantra, the front will collapse soon, Ukraine will fall soon. How can one listen to such truth? You know what's remarkable is that this is not being said by an opposition figure or a Western analyst. Klepak worked at the Ministry of Economic Development for 10 years, was the director of the Macroeconomic Forecasting Department, and even held the post of deputy minister. And for the last 12 years, he has been the chief economist at VEB, one of the key state structures financing the Kremlin's largest projects. Of course, such a heavyweight and saying things like that, that's it, goodbye. In the end, they just decided to silence the unpleasant voice. The cowardly underground heel clicker doesn't like it when people tell him about the bad stuff. He wants the good stuff. He wants pretty slides with pictures. That's what he wants. Well, and Ukraine is simply performing an incredible feat. Every day, Ukrainian soldiers are destroying the occupiers and reclaiming their own territory. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. And today we are continuing our fundraiser for a pickup truck for the strike drone crew of the 26th Artillery Brigade, which is holding the defense in the Donetsk direction. Please take a look at this video.
Вітаємо! Ми бійці 26-ї окремої артилерійської бригади. Звертаємося до Бориса Тізенгаузена та вашої аудиторії з проханням допомогти зібрати кошти на авто для екіпажу ударних БПЛА. Будемо дуже вдячні Борису та кожному, хто підтримує наш збір. Кожна гривня – це внесок у нашу роботу, а значить, в нашу спільну боротьбу. Дякуємо за підтримку. Слава Україні!
Let's help our soldiers from the 26th Brigade. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There are mono, private, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad, and a QR code in the corner for those watching me on other channels. Your donation directly saves the lives of our defenders. And in every episode, I say a huge thank you to you for helping Ukraine and supporting our soldiers. One more piece of news. So, from bright, good, strong people, we have to move back to the swampy wastelands again. The Spasskaya Tower Military Music Festival has been postponed until next year. The organizers announced this. Everything was already ready. The schedule, you know, the orchestras, military orchestras performed there, I remind you. But something went wrong, and suddenly they decided to cancel it literally a few days before it was supposed to start. And it was supposed to take place on Red Square in Moscow. They even held this festival last year. So what happened this year? What were they afraid of? Well, instead of Moscow, they could have held it in St. Petersburg, somewhere in that alleyway where Putin reviewed the parade. Last year this festival took place on Red Square, and according to the organizers, as many as 10 countries took part. Belarus, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, Republika Srpska, and Italy somehow managed to sneak in there. Another piece of news, that warehouse from yesterday in Kolesino burned down completely. This was the largest Wildberries warehouse. It burned down completely to the ground. So, job fairs will be held for the employees of the burned down Wildberries warehouses. In my opinion, they need to hold a job fair for the entire Wildberries company. In the near future, this outfit will disappear. Following it, Ozon will go next, and then down the list. Don't harbor any illusions that Ozon or Yandex Market won't be touched. Everything in Russia will burn until you get out of Ukraine. Medinsky stated that the new Russian social studies textbooks will have more connections to real life. Let me quote Medinsky. "We have preserved everything that was best. We have updated the content, making it more lively. Less theory, more connection to real life." Medinsky is an aide to Putin. He definitely reminded the Russian kids that the editor-in-chief of the new line of textbooks was the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, also known as Demon, also known as the semi-liquid Terminator, also known as the ambassador of Hawthorne tincture. I'm actually afraid to imagine what kind of connection to real life there could be in textbooks edited by Medvedev. Some life advice, perhaps, on how to buy Baltica 9 without an ID, or Yaga, or maybe some online game, an online map of 24-hour dive bars. What could Medvedev possibly teach children? The only thing he has in common with children is that he also buys his clothes at Detsky Mir. Seriously, this is an elderly drunkard, constantly aggressive, using foul language, a grotesque villain. And just out of curiosity, I read the introduction by Medvedev for children in this textbook. It's a short quote, you need to hear it. Dear friends, you are beginning to study social studies. It is important to know the laws by which your country lives and develops, how the state is structured and functions, and what rights, opportunities, and limitations society establishes for you. What true patriotism is, and where we see our civic duty, our highest responsibility to the fatherland. That is, right from the start, the child is given opportunities, limitations, true patriotism, civic duty, and the highest responsibility to the fatherland. They are priming the kids so that they will owe the state and Putin for the rest of their lives, including dying ingloriously in Putin's wars. It won't work. It won't be possible to prime them to just have them ideologically saturated. In the Russian Federation, there is no ideology underpinning this doctrine, as there was in the USSR, and it is already too late to introduce one. For money, yes, perhaps some will go, but trying to instill some kind of fake patriotism, and for free at that, is unlikely to work anymore. And here, you can parade the old man in a side cap or a beret, it still won't help. In general, the propaganda pump in the Russian Federation now starts right from kindergarten, not even from school. Moreover, even if a child has reasonable parents who, for example, do not support Putin's policies and the war, the practice of denunciation that is currently flourishing in the Russian Federation could ultimately just deprive this child of their parents. The darkest Soviet times are returning with denunciations, snitching, and repressions. Do you remember the story of Masha Moskaleva? That is, in the spring of 2022, 12-year-old schoolgirl Masha Moskaleva was asked in class to draw a picture in support of the Russian army. Instead, she drew Russian missiles flying at a woman with a child. Next to her is a Ukrainian flag, and she wrote, "No to Putin, no to war." Here is that drawing. It was for this drawing that the snitch teachers and the snitch principal called the police, and from that moment on, the persecution of this family began. Her father, Alexei Moskalev, was subsequently accused of anti-war posts on social media and sentenced to 2 years in a penal colony. Masha was taken away from her father, sent to a shelter, and then handed over to her mother, with whom she had practically no contact before. And Alexei tried to escape from house arrest. He was detained in Belarus and returned to Russia. In 2024, Alexei was released from the penal colony. Masha met him at the gates, and a few days later, they fled Russia together to Armenia. They lived there for a year and a half and then received asylum in France. Now they are living there together. Just think about it. They took a child away from her father simply because of an anti-war drawing. Well, in general, in this regard, the Russian Federation is becoming more and more like North Korea. But Putin still has a whole lot to learn from Kim Jong-un. For example, in North Korea, there is such a concept or activity as snitching circles. Well, that's putting it simply. Of course, they are called something else there. That is, people who live in the same apartment building or live in the same house or work in the same organization or serve in the same unit, they gather once a week, and everyone has to stand up and say something about the neighbor to their right, something they did wrong, I don't know, didn't show enough enthusiasm for the party's policy and the leader, or something else. In other words, you have to snitch on your neighbor. And that is precisely why it is impossible to form any large anti-Kim or anti-party groups, because you don't know if the person who is supporting you in the kitchen today will snitch on you at the denunciation meeting next week. He might stand up and report you. So this total fear that everyone is snitching on everyone else, that is exactly what is there. And what happens next? Next, either you go to labor camps, or perhaps, depending on the severity of the crime, maybe something worse, and your family too. So you see how they've set it up that not only will you suffer, but your loved ones will too. That's why I think all of this will also be introduced in the Russian Federation, along with an isolated internet. But this is on one condition: if Russians don't swat this Botox jellyfish of theirs. I don't even know how much longer they can tolerate it when their internet gets encapsulated after the pseudo-elections. But if they tolerate that, then everything will continue just as I described. Well, my friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel, don't forget, and let's help our valiant UAV operators from the 26th Brigade. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.